Okay, let's kick off. Good afternoon, everyone, and good evening or good morning, depending on which part of the world you've logged in from. Welcome to the latest in the ECO webinar series. My name is Nitin Mantri. I'm President for ECO, and I'm the Group CEO for AvianWE. And today we have a very, very great session lined up for you. Something that's really close to me as well, which includes a 30-minute live interview and a 15-minute Q&A session. Before we begin, just to remind everybody, I'd like to ask that you remain muted until we come to the end of this interview. By then, you can either ask your question via the question box, raise your hand, or if you want to unmute yourself, or just post it in the chat box. As you know, today's topic is dark social. What it is, why it's growing, and how to estimate its impact on your campaigns. And we have today with us to shed as much insight as possible, Richard Benson, who's founder of Released. In 2012, Richard co-founded Released, a platform designed as a multi-layered tool for PR professionals looking to present all the PR work in a visually impactful and digestible format. Released is also currently a voice leading the global conversation surrounding dark social and its influence on communications professionals and communications agencies. So Richard, again, very glad to have you. I want to kick off now with a very simple basic question. What is dark social? I think, we've heard about it, but I think a lot of us don't know what it is.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about this topic. I'm very pleased to be here. So I think, yeah, it's a valid first question. We didn't know what dark social was a couple of years ago. We kind of stumbled across it. 90% of the people we've spoken to don't know what it is. People think it's something sinister, but it really isn't. So yeah, I guess that one way of describing it is to describe its opposite, which is open social, first of all. So open social would be platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Pinterest, and they tend to share data with the outside world. That's one aspect of it. So for example, we have a reporting tool, people add coverage to our tool, and we basically go to these platforms with the links to the coverage, and they tell us all about how that coverage is being shared and engaged with. That's an example. The second way to look at it is if you're like a website owner and you've got access to Google Analytics, open social platforms will show as sources of traffic to your website. So you'll be able to literally say, okay, we had 100 visitors this month from Twitter or Facebook, etc. So really, dark social is the opposite of that. So dark social platforms don't share data with the outside world with tools like ours, for example. And the other asset is to go back to the Google Analytics situation. If you look in Google Analytics, you're able to see sources of traffic. As mentioned, you'll be able to see the open social platforms, but you'll also be able to see people coming to your website through organic search, through paid ads. But there'll be another line that you'll notice that says direct traffic or none. So these are people that have come to your site almost by magic. So you know there's traffic, there's no source. The argument is that a vast majority of that comes from dark social platforms. And so examples of dark social channels specifically would be WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, LinkedIn Messenger, Slack, etc. So when you take a step back, the fact is that most people who are on this webinar right now will have probably used dark social in the last hour or two. So it's absolutely nothing to be alarmed by. It's nothing sinister, and it really does play a huge role in the day-to-day workings of most PR campaigns, as we'll talk about in a moment.
So basically, dark social is literally dark because you don't know really what's going on there, and very difficult to kind of figure out who's using and what trends are. So on that, I mean, can you talk about? I mean, you spoke a little bit about the fact that it's very popular because we all probably used it in the last 1 hour. But can you talk a little bit more about its popularity? Because I was looking at your report, and it's some very interesting findings, which is like dark social is dominating more than 80% of activity today.
Yeah, so yeah, there's different ways to look at its popularity. So the clearest one is a WhatsApp, which is a prime example of a dark social platform, is now the most popular. social media platform of any kind in the world. That's according to research by GWI. And messaging apps in general have about over 3 billion active users, which is nearly half the world's population. And if you look at the top 10, many of them are dark social platforms. In fact, there are only a handful of open social platforms, so all the rest of them are essentially dark. And I think there are two primary drivers for this, for the popularity. One is what generally can be described as anxiety. So we've all felt the kind of pressure of posting on open social platforms like Twitter and Facebook. You're posting to a large community of people. Some may know you, many do not. There's this fear of judgment, of being humiliated, of saying something wrong. It's quite intense. And so there is a huge appeal to go private, essentially, into like a smaller group of curated peers where you can talk more openly. And actually, there was some research by eMarketer recently, which I found interesting. So they surveyed Gen Z, and they found that 45% of Gen Z or Z feel that there's, quote, too much pressure to be perfect when posting on those kind of types of social media platforms. And there was some other research by Reuters, and they asked people to give descriptors to open social platforms. So in this case, they use Facebook. And a couple that stood out for us were creepy and egocentric. And then they asked about dark social, and they used WhatsApp as an example, and it was honest and discreet. So you can tell by the way people feel that it's just more comfortable when you are essentially not posting things in a huge public sphere. And the second driver is information security or privacy, however you want to describe it. So I think the world is much more educated and aware of how personal information is used. And we all know that posting something on the likes of Facebook and Twitter is pretty much fair game for advertisers. They sell the data, etc. There is a general feeling that when posting on dark social platforms, that there is more security and control in terms of encryption. WhatsApp recently released an update to give you much more control over how long your content stays online. Whether it's true or not, I think that combination of, the feeling of not being judged and also having more control is very appealing for the silent majority of people who use social media.
So when consumers said discreet, so do they also feel safer sharing information on dark social compared to open platforms?
Yeah, I think that was another word that came up in that survey, things around safety and security, etc. So yeah, I just think they feel more freer to be honest with themselves and talk in a kind of a more authentic way. And I think we've all been in a situation whereby we've seen something online publicly. Sorry, my Google just went off. We've seen something online publicly that's really interesting, but we've just not felt the urge to kind of publicly post on it. And then we've seen the same story in a private channel, and then we've had a whole conversation around it. I think that kind of illustrates what's going on.
Got it. So tell me, let's go closer to some of the folks on this call. Why is it so relevant to the comms, the PR industry today?
So there's interesting research. This one's from Radium One that said this is the highest number I've found. 84% of content shares globally of all types of content happen on dark social. So that's really interesting because it shows that really, as PR people, when we are getting feedback and data about, okay, how many times has this piece of coverage been shared, what this research suggests is really we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, which is very consequential, obviously. The other thing is when you zoom into the type of content that's being shared, why is it relevant to PR? Well, if you look in the top 10 types of content, you're talking about links to articles and news stories, and you're talking about photos and imagery, which really is the bread and butter of the PR industry. So you can imagine the industry's spending a huge amount of time and effort creating stories, placing coverage, creating compelling content. And really, we're not aware that most of the activity is happening out of sight. So I think it's hugely relevant. The other third consideration is that it's generally accepted that the type of engagement differs in open and dark social platforms. So it goes back to what you said before, that people feel more comfortable engaging with content in, for example, a private WhatsApp group. I know I do, for example. If my friend sends me something that they think I and my close school friends or university friends or whoever will like, we're going to look at it and we're going to talk about it, and maybe we're going to share relevant stuff. That is hugely compelling for an industry that's trying to, get engagement with their story. And I think there was a good quote from someone called David Cohn, who's co-founder of a company called Pigeon, and he said, so many brands see a higher conversion rate with dark social traffic. The reason behind this is quite simple. On dark social cat channels, content is shared between friends who know each other's likes and preferences. It's a level of hyper-personalization that most companies can only dream of. So I think those three things mean that it's really, really relevant for an industry whose job it is to get stories out there and get them engaged with it, which is kind of the whole point, really.
Yeah, no, true. So the big question that everybody will ask us, how do you measure it? Considering you don't see it, you don't know what's happening. So how do you actually measure a success of something that you want to push out in dark social?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one because the definition of dark social is that it's unmeasurable. As soon as it becomes directly measurable, it ceases becoming dark social. So you can't. But what you can do is you can infer from open social activity what might be going on, broadly speaking, in dark social channels. So I'll be specific. So we worked with a company called Get Social, who have technology that's able to plug into Google Analytics and track and analyze dark social traffic versus open social traffic. And over a period of months and years, they collected an enormous amount of data, and we asked them for it and they gave it to us. So it basically showed that for every X shares of content in open social platforms, there tends to be Y shares in dark social platforms, according to this data set, which was about 185 million rows of data. So what we did is we created an algorithm within our platform, Released, that uses the open social data that we are able to get accurately from platforms like Reddit and Pinterest and Twitter and Facebook, puts it through this simple formula and essentially multiplies it by this ratio that kind of implies how much dark social activity is happening based on open social. So, we are very open about the fact it's like a ballpark estimate, but what we're trying to do is make the industry aware that there's stuff happening here that you don't know about and you should probably be talking to your clients about and thinking about. And we're early stage, and if more data becomes available, we'll factor that in, but at the moment that's how it works. And it's been really, really popular with our customers, actually.
So what you're saying is that we have to measure the open platforms to get some sort of measure of the dark social piece, basically.
Yeah, it's an inexact science, but we know from the data that, and from the research I showed you before about 84% of content shares happening on dark social, that if stuff is happening in open social, which we can find out, then it's highly unlikely that nothing's happening on dark social, and it's very, very likely that more stuff is happening in dark social. It's just how much more. Well, we can estimate that through historic data, and that's what we do. That's what we've done in our platform.
So I'm assuming with dark social you can go really hyper local, right? Hyper local, I guess. Right. So is that true? You can put down who you want to target really more.
Not necessarily, because for example, you can't post content to a WhatsApp group that you're not a member of. It's not like, right. And also that wouldn't go down very well, as you know. But what you can do is you can seed things in places that are likely to attract interest from people who then swallow it up and then share it in their dark social channels. So examples would be, if you look at Reddit, for example, Reddit is a platform that's extremely popular, and it's basically a board that's broken down into, as many of you know, into subreddits. And subreddits are niche topics that can be very broad, like science, but extremely narrow, like a specific TV program or subset of science or whatever the topic is. So what PRs could do, and there's a lot more we can talk about the opportunities, is they could create stories and content specifically for those kind of more niche audiences, seed them in the right places, keep a close eye on the engagement that you can see, and be aware that if it's good stuff, that it will be swallowed up into these dark social channels, even though you can't directly see them there yourself or indeed measure it.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. I guess you can't post content directly. You have to seed it through. I guess they will start probably have dark social influencers at some stage. Who knows? So what is, to this group who's listening to us, what is the opportunity for PR professionals today? How do they utilize and, really the dark social piece?
I think there are a handful of opportunities. Starting with the most broad is just opportunity to have more knowledge, which is crucial. So I used to work in PR in agency side and in-house. And the biggest fear is that your client comes up to you or your executive and says, hey, what are we doing about dark social? What's dark social? And you have no idea what that means. You do not want to be in that position. So really the first thing we're trying to do is just help demystify the topic. And to that end, we've written a report, a white paper, which just clearly describes what it is, gives examples, some of which we've talked about, which can be downloaded for free on our website, which is release.com, releasd.com. So that's what we're trying to do. But if you kind of zoom in, the other opportunities are to have a better understanding of the journey of PR stories and content. So going from a situation where you're kind of thinking, okay, well, we create the content, get some coverage, and then if we're lucky, it gets shared, and that's success. To, okay, there's this whole other aspect of PR, which is where it kind of goes below the waterline, and there's loads and loads of stuff happening out of sight. But if we're getting really good open social engagement, we can be even happier because we are really confident there's loads and loads more stuff going on. And I'll talk about potentially measuring that in other ways in a moment. And the other thing is just knowing that there is this opportunity in terms of much greater, deeper engagement in the story. So we talked about this before. Open social engagement is great. You get people clicking like, maybe leaving a comment saying, this is interesting. But actually, really what as PR people we want in an ideal world is people tearing our stories apart and talking about them and taking action. And dark social really is like a breeding ground for that kind of behavior. And I'm sure we've all experienced that, again, when our friends have sent us stuff that's super interesting. So the other thing we talked about is the opportunity to not be afraid to create really, really niche content and seed it in the right places. Again, because there is this opportunity for it to get a new lease of life in dark social channels, to experiment with that. Another one is to try to measure it using platforms like ours. And also we're about to launch a new super cheap tool called Lovemetrics, which is at lovemetrics.co, which is for people who can't afford big analytics tools or people who still want to use PowerPoint but want coverage metrics like coverage views, open social shares, and dark social estimates. So I'd recommend people go to lovemetrics.co and pre-register for that. And the final thing is, I was having a think about other ways of potentially measuring dark social. And I think there is a way of doing it. It relies on PR people having access to their clients or their own Google Analytics. So if we kind of zoom back into an area we spoke about before, which is imagine you are the owner of a website or you have access to Google Analytics, you're able to see sources of traffic, as we said before, and one of those sources will always be direct traffic, which we've said is most likely driven by people who've copied and pasted links into WhatsApp and then clicked the link and then directly visited your website. Well, what you could do is you could look at the historic traffic levels for direct traffic over the last 6 to 12 months and say, okay, you can actually plot this in Google Analytics. You can zoom into that specific metric, plot it on a graph, look at the baseline, and let's say, okay, well, we've got on average 500 visits a month from this dark social segment. Then you place a story, you can see engagement, you can see traffic coming from open social platforms, but you may also see a bump in traffic from that kind of direct source. And I would say that the only rational explanation for that, all else being equal, is that your story has found its way onto dark social. People are clicking links directly from WhatsApp, Slack, Facebook Messenger, and visiting your website, assuming that is the call to action. So actually, I think there are ample opportunities for PR people to better understand it, to seed content in the right way, and indeed to measure it if they have the right kind of access or the right tools.
Thanks, Richard. And gives me to another question, another aspect of this, and we briefly discussed it the other day, which is there are also a lot of people talk about dark social being used to also spread misinformation at times. Not only doing PR campaigns for the good or just regular campaigns, but also elements, and we've seen that politicians having used different elements of dark social to spread misinformation. Views on that?
Yeah, I think this is definitely more of a cultural question than a PR specific question. But I think we had a chat the other day about this, and I think that it's interesting because the power of dark social is this kind of hyper personalization, as we've said. But I think that can be a good thing when you're sharing really relevant stories with your friends or family. But also, obviously, it can be misused, and if the wrong kinds of stories make their way into these really closed platforms with your close family or your friends, it can be really, really disruptive. And I'm sure, again, we've either directly or indirectly heard about situations where there's been an uncle or a friend who's been introducing somewhat toxic stories into a group, and then to your horror, you see people you have previously trusted and respected swallowing it whole and regurgitating it. So I think, like all social media, it can be very easily misused. And I think although that's probably not a direct concern for PR people, it is definitely more of a cultural concern, something to be aware of, especially as dark social platforms become more popular as well.
Yes. So tell me, out of all the dark social, mediums you've spoken about, WhatsApp seems to be the most popular.
Yeah, definitely.
But WhatsApp is still not popular in markets like the US, for example, right? Or is that gained traction over the last few years?
It's massively popular in the US. Yeah, since Meta bought it, they're essentially been. It's interesting. So dark social platforms have seen astronomical growth, especially during the pandemic, as families basically needed a way to communicate remotely rather than in their gardens or in their living rooms or whatever. So it's really understandable that grandmas and aunties and mums and dads and kids pick up WhatsApp so we can stay in touch. It's a no-brainer. So the growth has actually slowed, but that's only because so many people have already onboarded it. There's not really that much growth opportunity left. So what's actually happening is that more platforms are coming online. So there's platforms for trading, for example, that are dark social or stocks, etc. There's platforms for discussing politics specifically. So there's platforms that are being created that are around niche topics specifically. So I think we've got to the point where dark social is already mainstream without a question, and now we're seeing more kind of niche platforms pop up.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I mean, from a US perspective, I said iMessaging or the iPhone has been more of a tool that people have used, which is on iMessages. So I guess that also becomes a dark social piece in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Some people have said email is dark social, although I was looking at our Google Analytics recently and saw traffic from email, so I'm not sure about that one. But as I said before, most platforms are dark. I should have given it a different name, a bit of a less sinister name.
Yeah, I was coming to that. It almost sounds like the dark web. So,
Yeah.
so yeah. But tell me, just a quick. If people have questions, please do post it here on the chat or the Q&A tab below. Um, Richard, I was going to the report, and it still seems that personal photos, like you mentioned earlier, are bulk of what people share or videos. So it's more visual content. And what about news? Is that a big sharing piece on dark social as well?
Yeah, that's definitely in the top 10. So news, links to websites, etc. I think the news stories, I haven't got the chart to hand, it's in our report, is in the top 5, and links to blogs. So I would say, links to websites, news stories, and blogs, which are 3 entries in the top 10, are all pretty much the bread and butter of PR, what's driving PR these days.
And the report you have, is it give trends from a particular market, or is it just goes across, and you think these trends hold good for different geographies as well?
Yeah, so it's a general introduction to dark social. It includes some of the research that I've been through today, plus other research. It talks about some of the opportunities that we've mentioned today as well. It's a really good primer. It's something that we designed to be read and shared around PR agencies and PR teams, just to quickly get people up to speed, close the gap in knowledge, and then to be able to get on with their day jobs.
Okay. We have a question. I don't know if you can see that on your screen, Richard.
Mm-hmm.
Estimated high circulation through dark social might be a hard sell when relaying campaign success to clients. Ideas on how exactly we can frame this?
Yeah, I would point you towards the research again. So as mentioned, AvianWE say that 84% of content shares happen on dark social globally. Now, if that's true, or even that's nearly true, then that can't be ignored. So as always, and also what we just talked about, Nitin, about the types of content that's being shared. It's a hard sell to say exact numbers, but I think it's responsible thing to do to say, look, we're seeing good engagement here in open social. It's likely that there's more, based on this research, there's more going on in dark social that we don't know about. So yeah, that's how I would kind of answer it using research and data.
Another question from Leticia: how can PR people avoid or face fake news in dark social?
As individual people, I think that PR people are best placed, probably out of any industry, to detect and deal with misinformation or fake news, because we create the news, we know how it works, and we know that some media can be trusted, and we know that some media probably is less trustworthy. So I actually think we're really, really well placed, not only to detect it, but also to help educate others as well. But in terms of how to combat fake news, I feel that that's probably a topic for another webinar.
Yeah, I mean, combating fake news is, it's not easy, and I think you're right. I think whether it's on dark social, I mean, fake news is everywhere. It's not just on dark social, and I think as individuals, we just have to question. And ICCO's been doing a lot of work around misinformation, and we've got a white paper going as well. But we just have to question everything that we see or consume today. Where is it coming from? Is it a reputed source, et cetera, et cetera. So and think twice before we press share or push it out on any mediums. I mean, whether it's on our WhatsApp groups, or for that matter, it's on our open platforms, right? So you've seen enough fake news floating around on open platforms. So we just need to question it all the time. And I actually think that over the next few years, probably PR firms maybe go a step further by including fact checkers amongst themselves, right, in their teams. because more and more content is going to be out there, which is going to have question marks on it. So, and fact checking will become, either we partner or we actually have fact checkers in place.
Yeah.
But like discussion for another time, which is we can spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah, I also think ethics in the PR industry is very important. So there was an incident recently that the PRCA commented upon, where there was an agency who was not a member that was essentially trying to bribe journalists, influencers by paying them money to run their stories first, which is, if you look at it one way, trying to manipulate the news cycle. So I think it starts really with us as an industry and making sure that what we're putting out into the world is sound and factual and honest, whether that's a really serious news story or kind of survey about something that might seem innocuous.
Any other questions from anyone before I ask my next question? We've discussed, about what kind of news or what kind of content is being shared, photos and links to websites. Is it possible that if a agency or a company is running a campaign, they can actually find or identify some of these closed groups? Is that a possibility?
Absolutely. So we've done this ourselves with this report. So there are many closed groups on LinkedIn and Facebook, being examples, but whereby if you are someone who is credible and you have highly relevant content to share and you ask in the right nice way, you can be given permission to post content to the group. And this report that we've created has been downloaded hundreds of times. We had a previous report which was called the most popular KPIs in PR that's been downloaded hundreds of times. And largely responsible for that was a strategy of identifying niche communities on various social media platforms and asking permission to post in them. And that's been really successful. And I think that's repeatable for any industry, not just PR. If you're credible in that market and you get permission and you ask nicely and it's not salesy, yeah, of course you can. Of course you can post in these communities,
One is posting. I think two, what I was really getting at is how do you identify where to go? Which are these closed groups and where do they exist? And who do you go to even ask for permission?
I think it really just depends on the platform. Google is the first place to start, trying to find niche communities, niche platforms. And they're from there, I think PRs are excellent at finding out who the gatekeepers are, whether that's a journalist or blogger or an influencer, doesn't really matter. They'll crack it. So yeah, I mean, as I said, there's now dark social platforms for sharing tips about stocks and shares in basically all verticals. So find out what those platforms are, join them, understand them, be part of the community, and then think very, very carefully about how to, and indeed if it's appropriate, how to share content with those communities in the right way. But yeah, it's a huge opportunity,
Yeah. And WhatsApp, some of these communities may be a few people, some of them may be 100 people, right? Mm-hmm. And WhatsApp, for example, I think limits the number of people to 512. I think there were 256 in a group. Now I think they've increased that to 500 odd. So what is an ideal closed group? So my question really is, you can also create groups of like-minded people to run campaigns with, and make it into dark social where it can move to other similar groups. So you can actually create your own group. Is that true? Is that possible?
I mean, you can always create your own groups on things like WhatsApp. Absolutely. There's no reason not to.
I mean, for running a campaign around a particular topic, you get the right people together, create a group, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's a closed group on LinkedIn or Facebook or anywhere. You could do that and then make that the center of your dark social activity and get people to join that?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of those things that's slightly easier said than done, to create your own community. Like, what's it about? Why would people join? Who's going to spend the time to coerce people to join, etc.? Which is why I think there's probably enough existing channels out there that are thriving for PR people to just sit back, observe, pick the right one and approach it in the right way. Of course, you can always create your own communities, but history has shown that is incredibly difficult thing to do, to grow and maintain the community of any size.
Got it.
Yeah.
Guys, any more questions coming from the group? Okay. Richard, this report is available online and people can just go and download it?
Yeah, so yeah, it's on our website, release.com, which is RELEASD.com, and in the resources section you'll find that, and also the KPIs report. And again, for those who are looking for cheap, accessible, simple metrics, I'd recommend registering for our new service, which is Lovemetrics.co, which literally starts at $5 a month. We're trying to democratize PR and social metrics and make them available for everyone, not just big agencies and in-house teams. So
okay.
yeah.
And what does, and talk a little bit very quickly about Lovemetrics.
Yeah, so Lovemetrics came about because we felt there's a gap in the market. Again, you've got big analytics tools like Cisions and Meltwaters, and they do a good job. You've got tools like Released, which are essentially reporting tools. But I think for most of the market, they're still using PowerPoint exec, and they're having to go to sites like SimilarWeb, manually put in their link. Sometimes they don't get the data. There's no way of getting coverage views or dark social. So we wanted to provide a simple tool whereby you add your links to social media posts or coverage. It gives you all of the metrics in spreadsheet format and like cutting edge PR and social media metrics. So it also works on social media posts as well. And you can then use that to evaluate your work without really need to break the bank at all. As far as we're aware, it's the only service like it, and it's at lovemetrics.co. And if you pre-register now, we'll let you know when it's launched.
Awesome. Richard, any last few words before we wrap up?
I think we've done a great job of covering most of the areas of dark social today. So I just wanted to thank everyone again for listening, and I do hope it was useful.
Great. Richard, thank you so much for sparing your time. And if anybody has any more quick questions, please, last call, really. If not, then we're going to wrap up. Thanks for coming, for joining us, for those who joined. And for those who couldn't join, and if your peers, friends, family want to take a look at it, this is being recorded and will be available on our ICCO site. So do spread the word if you want to listen to this later. Thank you, Richard. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Good to talk.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.